Perfect.
Hello, everybody. Adam Parks here with another Receivables info webinar. I can see that we've got everybody joining here, so I'm just going to give it a second as people are kind of joining the session here and getting a chance to listen to us talk about reputation management. But in the interim, I thought it'd be great to start this off with a little bit of information about Catalina. So for those of you that have not met Catalina yet, I don't know what rock you've been hiding under. Um, but Catalina joined our team back in September and is an integral part of our events, our marketing plan. Catalina, could you tell everyone a little bit about yourself and how you got to the seat that you're in today?
Absolutely. Well, I came to the industry a very roundabout way. I had a bunch of different odd jobs in my background, including being a professional magician. So getting here has been an interesting journey, but I started in the industry with Prodigal, which is a great company that builds AI. And then I began with you guys in September, and I just hit my 2-year anniversary with the industry as of RMAI, because when I started with Prodigal, the first thing I did was go to RMAI. So people said, "Oh, great. How long have you been with the company?" And I'm sitting there going like a day, couple hours maybe. This is my first thing. So as of this last RMAI, I hit my 2 years in receivables management industry, and I'm having a great time. Loving it here.
Well, we really enjoy having you as part of the team. And so I think the topic today is a really great fit for our discussion. So let me just encourage, and I feel like I know just about everybody in the audience today. Either we met each other at RMAI, we've known each other for years. But anybody who has questions as we're going throughout this, you can either use the chat tool or the Q&A tool, and I've got those up on a side screen so we can monitor those and participate in the discussion. But I'm going to talk specifically a little bit here to some of you that are in the audience, just kind of understanding the needs of our marketplace. But reputation management for me has always been an integral part of who we are in the receivables management associate or the receivables management industry in general. Can you see my automatic drop back to the RMAI language? But from our perspective, and some of the best run businesses and some of the most honest financial institutions are in the collection space, and it's always been a struggle to get organizations to talk about who they are. And because the industry wanted to, let's say, ostrich head in the sand for so many years, it created an opportunity for these air quote consumer attorneys to start creating a web presence for themselves in an attacker fashion. And so a lot of the best organizations in this space are being actively attacked through search engine optimization, through Google Ads, and other tools that these consumer attorneys are using to try and convince the consumers that they should sue the debt collector rather than paying their debt. That's always something, maybe it's because I've been in this space for almost 20 years, but it's something that I've always taken a little bit personally. So I want to kind of explore this idea today of what is actually happening in the marketplace, and then I want to talk some about how are we resolving these issues across the industry, and what specific actions can organizations take to defend themselves and to defend their reputations. So let's jump into the slide deck.
All right. So it's gonna let me. There we go. First thing we've
Yeah,
got
fair enough.
is
Um,
talking about building a moat. And so a couple weeks ago, we did a different webinar about the importance of your website and how it is literally the cornerstone of your online presence. And another way you can think about this is it is the only real estate that you own online at all. You can be posting on LinkedIn or on YouTube, things like that, but you don't own it. So the only real estate that you actually have is that website. So it becomes your castle that you need to protect. And the way you want to protect that is build a moat around it. And as you were just saying, Adam, this is such a litigious industry full of attackers. And they are spending so much money to try to dominate results and just get at a bunch of great companies. So how do we build that moat? That comes down to three things: content, content, and content, essentially.
It sounds so simplistic, but it's such a true statement, right? Like, so kind of going back when we talk about the importance of your website, right?
Mhm.
It is the keystone of everything that we do. And I named our marketing firm Branding Arc for a reason. That was a marketing theory that I was working on in college. And think about that's like the early 2000s, time bracket, not to date myself too much here. But the branding arc in my mind was always a stone arc way, right? And in the center, in that keystone position is your website, because no matter whether you're doing digital or you're doing traditional communications, ultimately you're trying to drive everything back to that keystone, right? That website is the real
Absolutely.
estate that you own online, unlike Twitter. And so when you talk about the real estate that you own, I want to drop a comment in there as well. Prior to the Elon Musk takeover of Twitter, there was a day in which Twitter decided that our industry did not deserve a voice. And in
Mhm.
managing many accounts across this space, we had, I believe it was just shy of 40 accounts that were terminated by Twitter overnight because they posted American flags on Memorial Day. That's not a joke. Like I know that's some people may take it as a political statement. It's not. That's the facts of what actually happened, and there was no recourse. There was nothing that we could do to reactivate those accounts. There was nothing. There was no appeal process. There was nothing. We posted American flags on Memorial Day. Therefore, they determined our content to be ineligible for posting. Um, so that when you're renting that real estate, it really puts you in a negative position. So renting that
Abs-
real estate, right? Like I have no control. But as we going back to kind of that marketing arcway, as I think about the keystone, down one side, I have my digital communication, starting with my most effective, least expensive, and then working my way down. So starting with, creating content and moving all the way to paid advertising. On the traditional side, you're talking about sending out business cards, postcards, flyers, right? Like those kinds of things, all the way down to television and radio advertising, which is not necessarily relevant to our industry, but from a general marketing perspective, I think it's incredibly valuable.
mhm.
Then when we talk about the moat, I love that analogy of building the moat. And the reason I like to think about it that way is I think it helps people to visualize what we're actually dealing with here. And so if you've got a new brand in this industry, you've got a new organization with a new name that you want to prop up, if you don't dig that moat soon and quick, eventually the attackers are at your doorstep, and you're not going to be able to dig that moat while you're under attack from third parties. So, being able to put yourself in a strong defensive position with a deep moat and high walls, that's done through content. So, by creating positive content about your organization, by distributing that content in a variety of places, you're able to create an environment where it is defensible. Because if you've got good content on your website, on YouTube, on Twitter, on LinkedIn, across a variety of other profiled sites like Receivables Info, that provides us with a really great opportunity to create this defensive position. Now, defensive and offensive are not necessarily mutually exclusive, right? Because it's all
Yeah.
about talking about your organization in context, right?
Mhm.
It's not just, hey, look at my company. It's about being able to talk about the company or that organization in third party as well. So I think that's going to be a pretty major factor. And then when we say content, that is across the board, right? That's video, that's written content, that's social media content, because Google is looking at the frequency, the relevancy, and the authority of all of the different things that we're talking about. And in those three fashions, for those of you that are on this webinar that have worked with us for years, you notice that we update website content like on an annual basis, because we want to continually demonstrate to Google from a search engine optimization standpoint that the content is relevant, frequent, and authoritative. So it really does play into kind of a much broader perspective of where we're trying to be as an industry. And I always hear the same thing. At least I used to hear this more often. I feel like organizations have opened up a little bit, but most of the time when I would talk to a debt buyer or a collection agency, even a creditor, it'd say, "Well, I'd love to create content. I just don't have anything to talk about."
Absolutely. I don't have anything to talk about. Well, how about expertise, appearances, conferences, company updates? You can talk about anniversaries, promotions, product or service releases, and a very big one too, community involvement. All of those things.
Isn't that the biggest one? Because community involvement, look, I don't want to give away trade secrets here, but if you are a member of a trade association in the receivables management space and you're making charitable donations, which I know everybody on this call is, putting out a press release or putting out an article and distributing that through the RMAIs, the ACAs, Inside Arm, accountsrecovery.net, receivables info. I mean, you can distribute to all of those places for free because the whole industry is looking for more positive content about your
Mhm.
organization. I think, unfortunately, it's really just our clients that actually take advantage of the opportunity to generate that content and to make sure it's being appropriately distributed, which I think is a kind of a missed opportunity for the industry.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right. Let's take
Let's
it to
move
the
on.
next thing. Little bit
Perfect.
about SEO, an overview. For one, just an overarching rule, it is a constantly changing game. Just when we think we know the rules of the game, they're going to change it. And they're not even going to let you know. And that's a big part about Google is they they want it to be changing. They want you not to know what's going on. So it's this whole game. We talk about defensive SEO as a game of Monopoly too, where you have to own the whole, you can't just own a couple of different properties here or there. You want to own the whole side of the board game. And then another big thing with SEO is your SERP, which stands for your search engine results page. And what's very interesting about that is it can be different depending on location, depending on time of day. It constantly changes. So there's a lot of moving factors, and it becomes something that we are constantly chasing. SEO isn't like a set it and forget it. It is something that you are constantly working on as you go on with your website, with every piece of content that you put out.
You're right on point. I mean, it is a constantly changing game. If I'm trying to remember the statistic, but I think it was October where we had 5 algorithm changes with no new information.
Yes.
And then we're starting to see Google coming out. Google is in the middle of testing their generative AI search models.
Mm-hmm.
And that sounds exciting and it sounds like something that might be pretty cool, except it's not. From what I've seen of it so far in my testing, because it has actually displayed for me a few times, and then I used that opportunity to run as deep a testing as I could before it disappeared. But Google wants to start using uncurated content. That's a scary thought, guys. Uncurated content. So rather than Google pulling from authoritative sites, they want to start pulling from discussion forums that are completely unmonitored or curated. That creates a big problem for the industry because it's going to put us in a weaker position in terms of being able to respond to negativity, right? When it's
Mm-hmm.
happening now in certain places, like we do have some level of responsive control, but I think the evolution of what Google is working on right now is going to be quite difficult. To be perfectly frank, I hope they fail in rolling out this generative AI search because I don't believe it's what's best for the end users. Forget our, even beyond our industry, I always want to protect the industry, but I don't think it's what's best for those that are Google users and are using it for search. Now, when we talk about the constantly changing game, we talk about the SERP or the search engine result page with Google. This is something I really want to hone in on here because this is the battlefield in which we're fighting, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you
Yeah.
send out, ABC organization sends out a letter to the consumer, and the consumer is first going to go check out their website. High probability, right? It's a really high probability. Um, but the challenge here is that when they go to put in the site, they're probably not going to type in abc.com. They're just going to type the name of the organization into Google and see what comes up. And if the first thing that comes up is one of these consumer attorneys who is just saying, "Oh, don't pay your debts. You don't actually owe it. It's we're going to sue them and make it go away." Um, that's you're it's not speaking towards the quality of your organization. And some of the best run organizations, I mean truly great companies across this space, are facing this exact same problem.
Mm-hmm.
But the search engine results page is where the battle is happening. And through the years we've found some tools and some tricks that we've been able to use to help control that. And as Google has modified their search engine result pages, it's required us to constantly modify our strategies across all of our clients, deploy new technology, deploy new schemas. And that might even be within their website. So imagine you have a website that's been around for 5 years and it's still a very current piece of technology. Well, when Google rolls out another algorithm change that now all of a sudden is looking at the frequently asked questions schema and starting to display those directly on the search results pages, how are you going to react and respond? Somebody needs to
Add
learn
a
that
to your
schema.
page.
Somebody needs to write the FAQs, get them deployed across your website, make sure Google is re-indexing your site as quickly as possible. Because I guarantee you that the SEO groups for those consumer attorneys are doing exactly the same thing. I mean, we're
Mm.
monitoring their sites, we're watching how they're modifying things, and we're trying to learn from what they're learning at the same time. Google does not want anybody to know how the algorithm works because people will start to game the algorithm. And that's why I've always focused on what Google has told us to focus on. Rather than trying to find ways to shortcut, I've always focused on the quality of the content, the frequency, the relevancy, the authority. Does anybody catching a general theme when it comes to reputation management across the receivables management industry? And I don't care if you're selling t-shirts or coffees or whatever it is that you're selling online, the game plan is the same, right? Like the playbook doesn't change.
Absolutely.
Right?
Frequency,
Same.
relevancy, authority.
It's the same thing over and over again. And the defensive position from a monopoly game, again, this comes down to rented versus owned real estate. And I don't want to control Boardwalk. I need to control the entire side. I need the railroads. I need Park Place. I need all the green properties on that side. I need it all because I need to make sure that we're completely controlling it because one bad search result there provides those consumers with an opportunity and it provides a cost structure to our client base, right? Because if you're losing at the game of reputation management, you are seeing more lawsuits than you would otherwise. This is a major lead funnel for litigation for these quote unquote consumer attorneys. I'm going to keep throwing up those air quotes. And I know I'm making somebody on this list laugh right now. So let's roll on to the next slide.
All right. So a little bit more, we're going to dive into how SEO works. I'm going to give the floor to Adam because you are an absolute expert and I've been learning so much from you about how it works behind the scenes.
So I love this part of the game because I think understanding how the search engines are working positions us to actually create a defensive strategy. So let's talk about keywords for a minute. And I know people think they know where I'm going to go in talking about keywords, but it's not about how many times can I say the same thing on the same page. There's actually an appropriate balance to the volume of content and keywords that you're including on any given site.
Yeah.
So when
If
we're
you use too
writing
much, it flags.
1000%. And if you don't use enough, it doesn't know that that's what you're aiming for.
Yeah. It's
Right.
a
So there's
balancing
this
act.
like perfect balance that you have to strike in terms of the density of the keywords as compared to the total volume of content. How many times did I say Catalina within this page if that's what I'm trying to rank for? If I said it 26, it was too many. If I said it 6, I might be right about right. If I said it 2,
Not enough.
it's not really going to rank me in the same way. And I think that causes some confusion. I think also this is also an important topic as it relates to social media. So whatever the keywords are that you're using on your website, you're going to want to carry some of those keywords over into your social media and your other profiles because you want everything to have a well, not the same message. You want differentiation, but you want to be communicating roughly the same thing with a similar tone. I think it's important to maintain that tone across everything that you're communicating, because those keywords and the selection of the keywords should be different on every page of the website. I mean, the search engine optimization portion of managing a website is actually takes us just as long, if not longer, than designing it, than writing the content, because we have to go through each one of those images across the entire website. We have to write a description so Google knows what it is. So when Google sees an image on a web page, it can't see it the way that you and I see it, right? Like it doesn't see
Yeah.
the slide deck with the words. It just knows that there's a picture. Right. And then in the background code, it's called the image source code or the alt text. We actually write out a manual description. And we've tried all different kinds of things. For those of you that have been following my discussions about AI, we tried leveraging artificial intelligence and ran some experiments as to how this might work with that, using an artificial intelligence tool set to read and understand those images. Yeah, total failure. That was a waste of time. It was a really cool idea. It was a great experiment. I'm glad that we tried it, but it wasn't the quality of results that we would expect, right? I'm sure it works for a lot of people, but we have a really high expectation of ourselves when it comes to search engine optimization. And some of that even comes down to speed scores and understanding the core web vitals behind your website itself.
Mhm.
For those of you that saw me out at RMAI, we may have had a quick conversation about how the websites for our clients are undergoing a major overhaul right now. At no additional expense to any of our clients, we've basically gone through, reevaluated our entire application stack that sits on the WordPress platform and increased our speed scores. So we saw speed scores go from where it generally is an average around the web in the 30 range to the 90 to 100 percentile range. That's a wild difference, right? I mean, you're talking exponential increases in speed, but the technology has changed. And because the technology has changed, we have to stay up on top of that, right? Because Google is looking at how well does your website perform from a
Mhm.
mobile perspective and from a desktop perspective. And we're going to talk about that here in a second as well. So from a keyword perspective, understanding what you want to communicate, making sure that your content has the appropriate keyword densities and that the structure and schemas of your web pages are correct and are readable by Google. Like, are they actually being checked against Google's rich snippet tool guidelines? There is a tool with Google that you can plug web pages in and try to understand how Google is actually viewing it. Besides your web search console, besides Google Analytics and the tools and reports that you can draw from that. I mean, there are really a lot of great tools that enable us to execute on some of these things. Now, hashtags is something else that I want to cover. This is less on the website and something that I see a lot on social media. So I want to just take a minute and explain what the purpose of hashtags to our audience so that you guys have a better understanding of how to use them correctly. Hashtags are really just a way to group content together. So for those of you that were at the RMAI conference a couple of weeks ago, RMAI 2024, popular hashtag. Some people were using RMAI 24. The two different groups that were using the two different hashtags are not going to see the same content. So using a hashtag is literally meant so that if I post about RMAI 2024 and Catalina posts about it and the next person posts about it and the next person, that you could just search that hashtag on LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, whatever, and see all of the posts that are related to that particular event. It's a cool idea. It's meant for that purpose. What it's not meant for is to throw random hashtags at things. Only use a
Yes.
hashtag if you know what it means, right? Because like hashtag AI is going to, anybody who's searching for anything related to artificial intelligence, you want to hone that in just a little bit, make sure that your hashtags are relevant. But you also don't want something so obscure that nobody else is looking for it or using it, right? Hashtag, and then there's a whole sentence behind it. Guess what? Nobody's looking at that, guys. Like, it's cute and all in your social post, but it's not actually having the effect that you think it's having. And I think that's a big mistake that I see pretty regularly across LinkedIn and other platforms. There are some value to it, right? Hashtag receivables, people are searching that. Like, there's enough people following it. Now, when it comes to LinkedIn, for example, you can just follow a hashtag, right? So I can go in there, I could follow the hashtag receivables, and every post that has hashtag receivables will start to show up in my feed, regardless of whether or not I'm connected or following that group or person. So it does provide some interesting opportunities to monitor, to use it as a listening post, those kinds of things. But if nobody is following hashtag branding arc, it's not adding any value by having it in my actual posts. So just something that I think everybody really needs to consider as you're building out social posts and you're working on your social media campaigns, because there are some simple ways to manage this. And I think that there's some value to hashtags if you're using them correctly, but please no more than two or three, keep it simple. When we got 25 hashtags in a post, you're not actually increasing your visibility. And I can guarantee that after monitoring thousands of social media posts over the last decade. That aside, and we'll push the hashtags off to the side and let's focus on something else that is a little bit more direct to the search engine itself, and that's the internal and external links. So we talked about relevancy, frequency, and authority. So how do we measure authority? Well, Google measures authority based on I want to say it's raw just on how many links you have coming back to your website. It is about how many domains are linking back to your website. What authority do those domains have? So a backlink from, rmaintl.org versus a backlink from, abc.com are going to have two different relevant authorities based on the topic that we're looking at. And so there's a couple of different things that tie into that authority: your domain authority, your content authority, your throughput. There's a couple of measurement tools that you can use or that we use on a pretty regular basis to understand the growth of the value of the domains within our care. So there are some interesting things that you can do there. But how do you start to create internal and external links? From an internal perspective, I love doing it in context, right? I love having, if I've got a consumer page and I'm mentioning I'm mentioning something from that page or the consumers themselves in another page, I want to link back to the consumer page, right? I want to demonstrate that within the content, it's all relevant to each other. And the more that I can do that in context and not just having big buttons everywhere, I think the better off we ultimately are.
Mhm.
External links, whole new challenge, guys. So one, you can use social media to create those inbound links for your website. That's a great way to look at it, right? And you can link out of your website to different things too. So if you've got a consumer page on your website and you want to link to mymoney.gov, or you want to link to other relevant and authoritative financial literacy organizations. That's a great way to do it. That's a great way to create an outbound link. And if you can, whether it be through donations or whatever, you can create inbound links. So let's talk about an inbound link for a minute. What would be a great way that we've already talked about today to create an internal link or an incoming link? Well, I would do a community article. That would be a nice simple one, right? Because if I distribute that across all the associations and news organizations across the space, I just created 5 or more incoming links from relatively authoritative domains across our industry. It's a building block process, right? Like it's all about putting the bricks together and starting to build the pyramid. But I think it's really important that we understand, what are we linking out to? What are we drawing links in from? Now, if we've got 1,000 incoming links to a particular page and then we start linking that page out to other third parties, we are actually leaking some of our search engine juice. So we are like leaking some of our value out to our third parties. But if you're doing that in an organized fashion, that can actually add more value for you as well, because by pushing some of your authority to somebody else, you're looking for them to do the same with you. And when you
Mhm.
can do that in context, Google starts to recognize the authoritativeness of your content, if that's a word, authoritativeness. Um, Regardless, I think it's something that we have to consider, and this is something that our team looks at pretty deeply every time that we're building a website, every time that we're writing website content. But I think for organizations that have had an existing web presence for a long period of time, this has changed. There was a
Mhm.
point in time when I was in college where Google was all based on the volume of links that you had income and outbound, right? And so you would have these link farms all over, you could outsource this to any country. They'd build 1 billion links back to your organization. And, Google somehow thought that that was authoritative. And at the time they were trying to find different ways to measure the internet, right? And that's their job, is to categorize and measure the internet. If you really want to break it down to its most finite details. And I think as Google has gone through these evolutions, and like we talked about, just the rapid pace of updates that we're seeing from Google in the first place, this is a great opportunity, right? Or it's a great opportunity to look at the evolution of search engine optimization, starting from volume, then starting to move into some of this more authoritative pieces. And then that has continued to evolve as well to where we are today, generative AI search results.
Mhm.
And so how they're actually measuring it is unknown, because search engine optimization itself, SEO, is a multi-billion-dollar business. I want to say it's a $40 billion a year business, if not more, if you add in search engine marketing.
Yeah.
Well,
And if they
Google,
told you all the rules, it'd be like insider trading.
quite literally, right? If they told us all the rules, we're just going to do what we can to cheat the system. So if we
Mhm.
don't understand the rules and we just try to stay focused on what Google has already told us is the core underpinning value set that they're looking for: frequency, relevancy, authority. Right? Like they're telling us right up front what it is that they want us to be doing. All we have to do is listen and then try to execute on those things and find new and creative ways to do that. So let's roll on to the next page here, because I think from a how SEO works, there's a lot of background pieces, but in the end, it's all about this content, right? In the end, everything else that we do, all of the technical aspects, those are great, but if we don't have great content, we can't accomplish anything. The technical aspect and the content aspect need to work symbiotically, or there is no search engine optimization on them.
Absolutely. And a lot of what's on this page we touched about before. Like we did kind of touch a little bit on word count, but that was specifically keyword count.
Yeah,
Um,
that was more density, right?
yeah.
Keyword count, like word count, is a separate factor altogether. So
Hmm.
from a word count perspective, if your page has less than 300 words on it, Google's going, "Why is this important?
Why is it a page? So.
Do you know what you're talking about if you could only come up with 300 words about it?" And that's a challenge, because you have a lot of debt buyers, agencies, law firms that have not wanted to be as out in the forefront. And so this has been an epic battle for me for the last 15 years, right? Getting organizations to speak about themselves a little bit more is always a challenge.
Mhm. And then picking, so we've talked about keywords before, but you want different pages to have different keywords. Your About Us should be different than your consumer page. And making sure each of those have enough word count, and then balancing that keyword density so that it's not too much and flags and not too little and doesn't rank. And then you even have the difference between the way you structure your site with titles and headers can also affect that search engine optimization. And the last thing that we already talked about quite a bit is that image SEO. The
Mhm.
computer's not just going to look at the image and be like, I know exactly what that is. So you need to plug that in there. But there's also a different way to say it. You don't just want to say blonde woman holding cup. If you're trying to sell this cup, you say rose gold Starbucks cup held by user, something like that. You want to watch
100%.
your language.
You're 100%, 100%. When it comes to the different pages with different keywords, I'm sorry, let me go to the differences between the titles and headers here for a second.
Yes.
So for those of you that are familiar with Microsoft, right? Like you go into a Microsoft document, you've got a title, you've got a header one, a header two, a header three. They all have different sizes, colors, shapes, underlines, bold, whatever, right? That you're setting for those. Websites work exactly the same way, right? And so it's having that title on the page, having one header one, and then having subsequent header twos and header threes. Now, the interesting part about this for me, it comes into accessibility.
Hmm.
And so so accessibility, the Domino's versus Robles case of 2019 created a really strange environment where all websites are places of public accommodation. And so
Yeah.
basically, your website now falls under the same rules as a local store or a restaurant, right? So Domino's had to pay $20 million because the man could not order a pizza being visually impaired. They didn't have the technology or tools in place. So I do think that number one is a very important factor. And there are a lot of tools that you can use to improve accessibility overall, right? There's all kinds of overlays and widgets and tool sets. But regardless of using those tool sets, it's important to make sure the structure of the code of your website meets those accessibility guidelines as well. Because when you get scanned by third parties or Google is scanning it as part of their core Web Vitals scans, that can start to cause some problems for you. And I think it's very important that we understand what ADA accessibility is and that our sites are structured appropriately. And then, whenever possible, have the appropriate overlay so that the end user can manipulate the visibility of the site based on their needs, right? It doesn't need to be, you don't need a whole other website or anything else. There are some actually somewhat easy ways to manage it and provide a better experience across the board. Look, all of our websites have really three purposes: collect more payments, hire more people, and defend our reputations, right? Like those are the core three things that this industry wants to do with their websites. And I think if you look at each one of those pieces, right, like getting into the payment side of thing, collecting those payments is all about being visible. Right? It's about being able to draw in that consumer, get them to authenticate or to make that payment, right? We're debt collectors. That is our primary objective. But then you're also going to have, hiring new people because when somebody is like you're out hiring, and I think just about everybody out there is having trouble hiring these days. And if you're out there hiring, and when a consumer or a potential employee goes looking at your organization's search results, what are they going to see? Are they going to see a 1-star Google review on 500 reviews and feel like maybe this is not the kind of place I want to work? Or are they going to see 5-star reviews and some positive content and positive things about your organization? I mean, I don't know about you, but for me, if I was looking for a job, I feel like that would be a pretty major factor in the final decision that I made,
Absolutely.
right? Like, would you have wanted to
That's
come
the
to
first thing
Branding
I
Arc
do.
if we were all negative?
No. And that's the first thing I've always done when getting a job is when you're looking at it, you look at the website. And then when I get the job, all my friends and family, oh, where do you work now? Can I see? Like, let me see the website. That's what they want to see. They want to check it out. So
And when they
everybody,
go to check it out, chances are they're not going straight to the website. First thing they're
no,
doing is they're going to do a Google search, and that SERP or the search engine results page is going to show up. And now we're going to have to work our way through explaining ourselves.
yep,
I don't think anybody wants to be in that position. That's not a lot of fun. But I think it's important that we understand the differences between the titles and headers because, again, this is something that seems so minor, but if you're not paying attention to it, if it's not part of your website, it's actually working against you and pretty significantly. So it's all about the little things. And I'll give you an example even from this morning, right? We were talking about core web vitals and website speed. So our web
mhm,
team was working on a site this morning and updating it. And as they were going through the process of updating this site, they came across, hey, we just can't get the speed score to exceed 40. I don't know what's happening here. It's just not working out for us. And I started digging into the code with them and I said, okay, so let's walk through this analysis and let's try to better understand what is causing us to be slower than we expect, right? Because if we're shooting for 100 and we're only hitting 40, we got a pretty serious room for improvement here. And what we ended up finding this morning was that there was one line of code. There was one JavaScript that was costing us across about 5 or 6 different score metrics. So when we're looking at our scores, right, we get a nice round number for mobile, we get a nice round number for desktop, but within that, we do have a whole bunch of subsections, and it does give us an indication as to why we're being penalized on our score. And so when we worked through it, we were able to actually change one thing. And in this case, it was actually a YouTube embedded video. And I love using YouTube for videos because the second largest search engine on the planet ain't Bing, it's YouTube. So
Mhm.
if we're gonna like consider this, that's why I push so hard for video content. It's because that is the second largest search engine, and those videos generally are going to show up in search results, like in your SERP, right? Let's not pretend that Google owning YouTube means that they're totally separate, right? Like, of course, that they're helping each other. I mean, I've seen it a number of times. They can deny it till the world ends, but the evidence is pretty supporting to the statement. But just in changing that one thing. So, how do we actually change it? Rather than embedding the video so you can click play right there on the page and have that script run every time that page loads, what we did was we took a screenshot of the thumbnail for that video, laid it on there as a static image with a nice little play button on it. So when you click it, boom, it pops open YouTube, it runs that script separately. But that took us from that 40 score to a 90 score, and now they can work through the remainder of the minor pieces to bring it up to 100. But sometimes it is just like those little tiny things that make all the difference in the world when it comes to how are we controlling and managing our websites. So having that professional eye come in and get a better understanding of where do you stand today and where are you trying to get to, I think is a big leap. Now, I don't know that 90 and 100% scores were even a thing a year ago.
Mhm.
I've never hit scores this high ever. And and just for comparison's sake, understand that last time I scanned Amazon, I think it scored around a 35. Now, granted, that's a lot of dynamic content and thousands of developers working on it, right? So to compare a collection agency website to the largest e-commerce platform on the planet is not totally
Mhm.
fair. But I want to provide some level of perspective as to what it means to be exceeding 80 and 90% scores. So
Mhm.
there's a balance that has to be struck. And it does take a significant amount of effort and understanding to get to the point in which you can get a site functioning and performing to that level.
Mhm. And to just cover real quickly a term you mentioned that I'm not sure everybody is familiar with. I know I learned it within like the last year. You talked about dynamic content.
Mhm.
So you've got static content, that's they open the page, that there's pieces that are there that are always there. Whether that's written content, images, things that are always stay there. The dynamic content, like in your example of Amazon, is things are uploaded every day. There's
Mhm.
new things for sale, there's new amounts of the product being available. So that's where the loading times come in because it's so dynamic and changing. And that can also be a blog.
Mhm.
But hopefully you're not updating your blog every couple of minutes, otherwise it's probably not going to be very
Well,
relevant.
otherwise you're a news organization, right? So if you look at like the
True.
CNNs and CNBCs of the world, you do
A
see a
big
little
one,
bit of
yeah.
that. And actually, you bring up you bring up a really good point that I should embellish on just a little bit here, and that's like we use the WordPress core platform, and so previously, back in the 20 years ago, we would write HTML code and when we display a site. That's not how it works anymore. WordPress is actually a database driven platform. So every word that you see on a WordPress website is actually being fed by the database itself. So every time you're opening this page, you are getting dynamic content that's being fed. And that causes slower sites. What we've what we've started to do to alleviate that challenge is we've started doing what we call static caching. So what we'll do is on a daily basis or an hourly basis, depending on the frequency of the updates of the site, we will
Mhm.
literally take, I'm going to say, for lack of better, for simplistic terminology, we're basically going to take pictures of each web page and stick that up on the web. And so when you go to hit this, you're hitting this. It's not feeding anything new. This is static and it's not even on the web server. It's actually sitting on Cloudflare's caching system. So every day we're taking all of those pictures of all of the pages of the website. It's being reloaded to our um, to our firewall and to our CDN or content delivery network in order to speed those up significantly. Now, it did take us a significant amount of coding and to spool up those caches on a daily basis, get them displayed, and have them not cause any kind of negative effect, right? We're not
Mhm.
spooling them all simultaneously. You have to kind of break those apart over time, otherwise you kill your server. So it does. Anybody who wants to nerd out about this at another time, I'm more than happy to go deep down the rabbit hole with you when it comes to the underlying technology for websites. But it is a very important topic as it relates to search engine optimization. Again, it's your keystone. If the keystone isn't going to hold up the arc, what's the point?
Mhm. All right, I'm gonna bring us to
Yeah, that's
our
what it's the next
last page. So this goes back to what we were talking about on our first slide, which was how to build that moat. Well, it's content, content, and content, those three things. But you want it diversified.
one.
And we already talked about building those social media platforms and solving the we don't have anything to say. You definitely have something to say. You have a lot to say. You have expertise. You have things that are happening in your company. Maybe your company just reached its 25th year anniversary or even its 5th year anniversary. There could be new product service releases. There could be you're attending a conference. Going to RMAI is something worth talking about. That's a huge conference. So there's always something that you can talk about. And again, with those social media platforms, you may not own that real estate, but you should own what you do have there. And that means not just for your company. So let's use LinkedIn as an example. You definitely want to flesh out that company profile there, but don't forget your profile. Because when people are searching you and searching the company, they're gonna see all of that together. So you can highlight specific posts that you've had about the company, highlight what you've done, your skills, your volunteer work, your certifications. There's so much that you can do to flesh all of that out to help build that moat, to give you that authority that we were talking about. And then other ways that you can get that too is sponsoring content.
Mhm.
This is kind of like the backlinks by putting out your, if you had that community involvement that you gave to different news organizations, it can be similar in that aspect where you sponsor the content and that links back to you. Getting
Mhm.
any of those links are huge. And then we also talked a ton about how big YouTube is and videos. And videos are also extremely popular, especially with my generation. I know we are far more likely to want to watch a video on something than print out an article or even download a PDF to read it. A lot of us are very video oriented. And there's two types that you can be using. There's internal videos, which is produced by your company or by like branding arc, but it's from your company and you can
Mhm.
have it on your website, you can have it on your personal YouTube, and that is your content as close to your own real estate as you can have. But then don't forget appearances. Anytime you're on a webinar, anytime you are a panelist, anytime you show up in a RMAI video, so something that's out there, that's worth promoting and that's worth adding to your arsenal of content because it's you and it's your organization.
All really great points, and I think when it comes to the videos, there's something I want to kind of bring up, and that's the change in web traffic over the last, I'm going to call it 15 years.
Mhm,
Two major things have changed in terms of web traffic. The first is the use of video. And I think,
mhm,
Kat, you covered that pretty well. But the other thing that I want to point out here is this evolution of mobile users. And so originally we used to build, like, the evolution of mobile web traffic has been significant over time. When I first started designing and building websites in this industry, we actually had to build two websites. There was a desktop site and a mobile site, and we wrote some code that would try to identify the browser and serve you up the correct site based on the device that you were using. That wasn't perfect because what do you do with a BlackBerry? Right, like there were some complications back. I mean, again, we're talking about, like the 2006 2007 timeline. The iPhone didn't even come out until 2009, and that's when mobile traffic really started to take off, right? And then you had the introduction of Android around 2010 2011 that amplified it even further. And so that growth of mobile traffic was, I'm going to say, consistent from about that 2010 timeframe up until 2020, right? Let's say we were looking at roughly a 5 to 7% annual increase. And we got up over that, let's call it 10 years. We were looking somewhere around 20, 30% mobile traffic in the industry. And that's based on my numbers looking at hundreds of websites across our space because I do have access to analytics that no one else has. So I kind of saw this growth pattern. Then 2020 hit. And let me tell you what happened in 2020 when it came to mobile traffic. We jumped from somewhere around 50% to over 80%, some organizations.
Mhm.
So there's collection agencies and debt buyers out there I know right now that are looking at more than 80% of their traffic coming through as mobile. If your website is from 2010, chances are you're not providing a very good mobile experience. And so over time, we went from building these two websites to building what we call responsive designed websites. And so now the website is the same no matter what device you're on. You're looking at exactly the same code. It's just we've written our Cascade style sheets, or the code that allows us to determine how things are displayed on screen. We've written that in new ways. So if your browser size is this big, well, it's going to display it this. It's going to display mobile versus tablet versus desktop, and that's all going to be based on the size of your display itself. So even if you're on a new iPhone, for example, right? Like you might be on a new iPhone, which is only, a couple of inches in diameter, but the resolution on your screen is significant. And it may even be more than the laptop sitting next to you. And so it's just something to consider. So it is looking at that kind of pencil, the pixel density, and it's looking at the size of your screen in order to determine what content to serve. I love working with mobile. I think that's really a lot of where the future is headed. And to be perfectly frank, now that Apple is rolling out whole new devices, I think that there's all kinds of new opportunities that will start to come to the forefront. And we're already starting to experiment with some of the new technology. I think spatial computing is going to be kind of that next layer, but that's not going to happen overnight, just like mobile didn't happen overnight, right? Mobile took 15 years to get to where it's at, roughly. And I think that we're going to see kind of the same timeline as we start moving into the next layer. Unfortunately for us as the receivables management industry, it generally takes the government about an additional 20 years to provide clarity to any individual communication channel that's used by the receivables management or debt collection industries. So it does cause a little bit of challenge there. I think we'll continue to just evolve as we always have. We'll stay on the forefront as an industry, and I think there'll be new and creative things coming up as we look over the next couple of years. You brought up a couple other good points here as well that I feel like I should just drop a little bit of commentary on as we kind of roll up into our final minutes of the webinar here today. Let me make one more kind of statement. If anybody has any questions or anything that you want to hear us talk about, you can drop those into the chat or the Q&A. I'm happy to answer those. But from an optimizing of the social profiles, I think that's key. Our industry lives on LinkedIn. And so I'll tell you my personal strategy when it comes to social media across the industry. I use LinkedIn as my megaphone, and I use Facebook as my personal connections. And so even looking at the participants of our webinar today, I feel like more than half of you are on my Facebook as well. I don't post frequently, but I do kind of use that as more of a communication method. My favorite thing to use Facebook for is at a conference, because I just sit there and look at Facebook and see who's flying in and when. And I could be like, oh, they just left Chicago. They'll be here in 3 hours. Let me hang out here. I'll run into them when they're leaving, when they're leaving the registration desk or whatever. So, manage how much you're posting on your Facebook and things. But I do think looking at those separately is a good thing. I don't know a lot of organizations that are effectively using Facebook within our industry itself, although I do think over the next 2 to 5 years, we're going to see some pretty significant changes in the way that websites are managed and used across our industry. I think you heard me say this more than a few times at RMAI, but I do believe that my future lies at the intersection of debt collection, e-commerce, and remarketing. I do believe that there's a connection there, and I think it's going to take us years to get legal clarity on how we're going to do that. Fortunately, we're working with some really great attorneys to help us understand how we can start to deploy some of that technology, test some of those things in non-collections environments, and then roll them out into the collections environment once we're comfortable and confident in our ability to respond to whatever inquiries will come next. And there will be inquiries. Let's not be confused. But I think that there's some really interesting ways for for the industry to start at least setting up listening posts and trying to understand what's being said about us, where and how. I don't think we're ever going to stop any of it, but I do think that we can react, respond, and maintain our professionalism. Many of you have probably heard me talk through the years about what I'll call the Comcast model. And when it comes to social media, and I know a lot of people don't want to use social media for their collections organization, but let's think about how Comcast has done this really well. Is there anybody on this call that loves Comcast? Xfinity? Anybody? No, I already know the answer is
Use
no.
it. I wouldn't say I necessarily love it. It's like,
I
okay.
haven't met any, but no one's ever said yes to that question before, so I'm just gonna roll with it. But the reality of that is, no, nobody really loves their service. Either the internet, if the internet works, you don't think about them, and if the internet doesn't work, you're mad at them, right? So there's really no upside to their business. But what they've done really well, I spent a lot of time studying how they were managing social media as one of the most hated organizations on the planet, and I thought it was interesting. They always took people out of the public space and into a private channel. So rather than, consumer comes at them screaming, yelling, right? Ah, and rather than fighting with them in a public forum, they go, wow, I'm so sorry that you had this experience. I'd really like to help you address this problem. Maybe you could contact us here. Let's take this to a private channel and have a private conversation, which I think is also a great strategy for the receivables management space. In our situation, we're not allowed to argue in public. We have to bring it down to a private channel. But I think some of the tips, tricks, and language that Comcast has used through the years to diffuse or de escalate some of these situations has worked out really well in their favor. And I think that's a strategy that our industry will start to adopt over time and find some new and interesting ways by which to start to communicate some of these things. When it comes to your social profiles, never forget your own personal social profile. If you want a good example, I spend a lot of time on mine, right? Each one of my job postings on my LinkedIn profile is going to have different pieces of media, whether it be videos or websites or whatever. But making those modifications and spending a couple of hours building out your profile, making sure that you're talking not only about like, hey, I worked at Branding Arc, but what were your responsibilities there, right? Like help people understand who you are. It's not just about promoting your organizations, right? You can promote the organization on the organization's page, but please, if you're looking at your LinkedIn profile and the logo for your company is not showing up on one of your job listings, like you need to go adjust how your job listing is connected to your company page because you're not actually connected. And I see that all the time. But take a few minutes, go through your LinkedIn profile, actually make some adjustments and make sure that you're being accurate in the statements that you're making. Don't list degrees that you don't have. Seen enough of that shit. But I think it's a really good opportunity for you to kind of build something out that you have control over. So there's nobody on this call right now that's not capable of going into their own LinkedIn right now and making modifications or updating it, upgrading it, right? You may have to go through more in order to upgrade or update your website, but your social profile is your social profile. So please go out there, like use it to your benefit. It's worth it.
Mhm.
From a
And you can
sponsored
even do
content,
those
go ahead.
highlighted posts too
Yep.
on your LinkedIn for things that are most important to you right now. Like when I did my podcast release, that was something that I wanted to highlight. You put that there and it's important to you, it's important to your organization, it's important to the industry. Make sure you're constantly updating that. That's another great piece of real estate.
I think it's great. You can also boost those posts fairly inexpensively, right? A $500 spend on LinkedIn advertising can often go a long, long way if you're trying to communicate prior to a conference or something like that, right? It's going to cost you about the same as buying drinks for the bar, right? Or a handful of people at the bar, but it's going to have a much deeper effect and potentially get you much larger impressions. And so when you're looking at that social media, you want to look at how far and wide is your content being distributed. That's your impressions. And then your engagement is how many people are actually interacting with you, comments or liking or whatever. Little side tip for those that are hanging out with us till the end here. The next time you put out a LinkedIn post, send that post through LinkedIn, right? Like you're looking at that LinkedIn post. There's a little send button. Click that send button, send it to 5 friends. If those 5 friends interact with it, your post is going to do exponentially better in terms of its impressions than if you don't. Um, I wouldn't do it with every social media post, right? Like you want to use that when it is a kind of a big swing opportunity, but just a little tip to leave in there for those of you that are sticking with us till the end. And then the videos, I feel like we've talked a lot about videos here today, and with just a couple minutes left in our webinar, and no additional questions popping up. Kat, anything else that you want to share with our audience today?
I think we covered everything really well. One thing I could say about videos is remember there's different opportunities out there from podcasts, there can be videos about your company, about hiring at your company. You could be on a webinar, you can be on a panel. There's so many different opportunities, and just looking at what's out there and what you can participate in, it's so worth it. Very worth it.
I agree. I think the digital communication is an opportunity to amplify your voice, right? It's one thing for us to talk, it's another thing for us to talk into a megaphone that everybody hears. And there's a lot of great opportunities with the trade associations, with us, with accountsrecovery.net or Inside Arm to participate in these types of discussions. It does put you in the forefront. Hell, that's why we're doing it today.
Yeah.
But for those of you that are watching, thank you so much for your time and attention today. I truly appreciate each and every one of you, especially looking at this list. I appreciate all of you. Thank you so much for watching today. Anybody that has questions, you can shoot us an email. You can respond on LinkedIn or YouTube to the video, or you can just go to brandingarc.com and submit an inquiry form if you want to schedule a time to chat. But until next time, Kat, thank you so much for coming on and chatting with me today. I had a lot of fun.
It was a pleasure. Thank you so much, Adam.
And for those of you watching, we appreciate you as well. We'll talk to you all again soon. Thanks so much, everybody.